Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Paul's family, we'd like to welcome you here. This is just the most perfect place to celebrate the life of a great friend of ours. And from all of us as friends gathered here today, our thoughts are with all of you as a family. We know as much as this has been a loss for us as friends, how much more it is for all of you. So to each of you, to Kathy, to you, Ellen, to Paul's children, DC, Julie, Jay, Anna, to his brother John, our thoughts are with you. It's been 4 months since our friend Paul left us. I'm sure he's with us here today. We've had a time of mourning, and now today I hope it can be for all of us a time of celebration, to celebrate the opportunity each of us had to have this wonderful man in our lives. This is going to be a different service from those that you've probably been to in the past, but that's very fitting because that was what Paul was. So we'll hear today from friends, from family, from acquaintances, and we'll have some time at the end for each of you to share a few thoughts as well. I want you to treat this as a celebration. You don't, as Paul would have thought, there doesn't have to be that much of a sense of decorum here. If you feel like laughing, laugh. If you feel like crying, cry. If you feel like applauding, please do. Let's have some fun and let's regale ourselves a little bit in what a great opportunity we had. You know, Paul Robbins was equally comfortable having a barbecue in his neighborhood as he was with business leaders or entertainment stars or Olympic athletes. It didn't matter. They were all the same to Paul. And each of us found in Paul a sense of individualism. I want to start today and hear from one of the great U.S. ski team Olympic athletes who Paul worked with, and he worked with him early in his career. Before I do that, I want to read just a few lines that was in the tribute blog written a short time ago about Paul. This one came from current U.S. ski team racer Brian Friedman, and he wrote, "As an athlete, when you get a call from Paul Robbins, you know that you skied well that day. His tone of voice always confirmed your achievement of the day, and it came with a genuine quality that cannot be replaced. But more importantly, Paul would also call when the phones stopped ringing. He never gave up on those he believed in. I'm smiling for you, Paul, and my phone lines will be open for you." I'd like to now invite past Olympian and U.S. ski team member Jeff Hastings to say a few words.
Thank you, Tom. Nice to see everybody here with delays on. Tom allotted me 3 to 4 minutes. I can tell you now it will be a little longer than that, but I will try to work within budget. I want to start off with talking about, you know, how the big events in the world, you sort of mark yourself by where you were when you heard the news. It's sort of a natural phenomenon, the first step on the moon, JFK, the World Trade Center. We picture these things by where we were when you heard the news. And in light of this phenomenon, to me it's very fitting or telling that I can so precisely remember exactly where I was when I first met Paul Robbins almost 30 years ago. It was in the streets of a little town in Germany called Oberstdorf. It was a December night, it was 1980. And I was a member of what they were calling a promising U.S. ski jumping team, which, as Paul would say, promising is an adjective for nowhere to go but up. And that was us. He often told me that no one ever accused Mickey Mantle of having promise. And when we would talk about ourselves having promise, he would make that clear. So anyway, we're walking the streets. We had no idea that Paul would be there, and we come across this guy who's in the same parka as ours, and on the tour, that's how you mark yourself, is what parka you're wearing. And so, out of the blue, this guy is running at us, and he is running at us at 78 RPM in a 33 RPM world. He has a whole different speed about him. And I was immediately smitten, and I think we were all smitten. We had just met for the first time Paul Robbins. That first trip didn't show much promise, actually, and we got our butts handed to us, and so there wasn't much for Paul to write about. I guess I didn't make that clear. He had to write about our progress to show, and that first trip he really did not have much to write about. So he just as naturally settled into his second role, which was as a personal sports psychologist. And the way he would play this role is he was full of support for you until you started feeling sorry for yourself, at which time he would prescribe swift kicks to the butt, which he would administer personally and very generously. Paul was one who didn't suffer whiners. He never sought this role as team shrink or den mother. He just quietly and very generously saw the void and filled it. I think the thing that struck me most about Paul, especially initially, was his intellect and wit, both of which were legend and were dispensed like everything that Paul dispensed, without regard for audience or outcome. Paul was elements of style, Webster's, Thesaurus, and Encyclopedia Britannica wrapped up into one. He was Google before Al Gore had even invented the internet. Paul was the Yogi Berra who, when accused of being old, would quip, "It ain't the years, honey, it's the miles that matter." I don't know if he had a lot of miles or not many miles, but that was one of his. He was the guy who told us that in his experience, which he admitted might have been skewed by his Catholic upbringing, that bad sex was better than no sex at all. Paul was the guy who filled the room without sucking the air out of it, and I think that's a really important quality he had. He was someone who brightened a room without casting shadows. I've heard from many of my former teammates who knew and loved Paul, as I did, and they have all, like me, pined for the words to describe what he meant to them, which is, of course, fitting, because it was always Paul who found the words for us. And yes, every 4 years, a whole new herd of journalists were there and watching. Everyone wanted to know what the K-point was and what a telemark landing was. Paul was that guy who was there every year, and who not only knew about the telemark, but knew that yours was left foot forward. Paul was the guy in the press room with the biggest pile of junk and the laptop with the most stickers on it, the oldest laptop with the most stickers on it. It was easy to find where he had set up, but it was usually quite hard to actually track him down. You could try asking, but with language barriers, even something as simple as a name could draw wrinkled brows. And so all you would have to do is make the international sign for Tam O'Shanter. You guys know, if you just, and you go, Paul, and then everyone's like, oh, pool, pool. Over there was pool, not Paul. And a very excited Eastern European or Finn or Norwegian, now your best friend, would be dragging you by the arm to take you to find him, most times in the cafeteria, which, if you've been thinking, is where you should have started looking in the first place. And so I'm sure it's tough for everyone following me because I'm going to hit the TAM, and I know everybody knows about the TAM and probably everyone's going to talk about it. I'm sorry to steal thunder here, but the TAM. Paul was a marketing guy, right? He understood the value of setting a brand and sticking to it, and that TAM was everywhere. And it was legend, and I am convinced will continue to be legend. And it's still not clear to me. There's stories that there is only one TAM, and there are stories on the internet, conspiracy theories really, that there are multiple TAMs. And as I was talking to Al Trawick this week about Paul, Al's quick response was, and Al is a quick one, if there was a fleet, then he'd pick the rattiest one to wear every day. I wouldn't wash my hands in that thing. So anyway, he probably did have a fleet of them. He probably made sure it was the dirtiest one that he put on any morning. Paul was the guy who was always the last to quit. The press room would be empty, the event long over, and he always had one more story to get out. Always, or usually I would say, to some remote paper in East Overshoe nowhere. Don Mahler from the Valley News says that the invoices for these stories were never as timely or as reliable as the copy in these stories, which brings sort of a dichotomy, you know, that as hard as Paul worked, it was never about the money. It was never about taking anything. It was always about giving and about sharing. Working to share his wealth of understanding and history, providing the texture and context that took obscure athletes, and we were obscure, doing obscure things over 3,000 miles from home, and making those stories meaningful to a public who hadn't supposed that they ought to care. He brought the heart of the athletes that he covered into the heads of those who read his prose. And I think that's what's most striking to me about Paul, an appreciation that it's been brought to the fore really since his death, is the breadth and depth of the relationships that he was able to cultivate and maintain. Not just with athletes, not just with writers, not just with Reading baseball players, but everywhere he landed, he touched people. And I didn't really get a sense of the magnitude of this until Tom Kelly's blog showed up after his death. And it was stunning to me how post after post was showing up looking like they had been written by me or somebody who had at least as tight a relationship with Paul as I did. And they just kept coming. And I couldn't help but wonder with each heartfelt post, who in the hell were these people? I mean, I had seen Paul in a very tight world where he had many tight friends, and I knew all those people, but these people were coming from around the world and having experiences that I couldn't ever imagine how Paul could have the time for these people, the time and patience for these people, if he was providing to my relationship with him the time and patience that he was. It was just stunning to me. And I was curious how he had ever done this without showing it, how he'd ever done it and without ever letting on. And so it comes to this for me. I am truly saddened by Paul's parting. But at this, at the same time, I feel incredibly blessed and humbled and inspired by his life. And thankful to have been touched. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Where did this all begin? It was really interesting last night to talk to Brother John, or Robbins West as one of his original handles was. And he's going to tell us a little bit about life with Paul. Brother John Robbins.
Holy cow. Terrific. You know, 4 months is a long curtain call even for Paul. And I'm so glad you're all here. I'm so glad I'm here. I'm so glad that the Dartmouth Skiway is somewhere near Dartmouth. Where is it? Anyway, sorry we were late, but here we are. And we're not here to bury Paul. He isn't buryable. It doesn't happen that way. So we're just going to share some experiences, and hopefully we'll get to improve our own lives and maybe even inspire them some from the stories we'll hear. As I was introduced, I'm Paul's brother John. My wife Karen and I are from Pasadena, California now. We both have our roots in the East Coast. And 6 years ago today, Paul was the best man at our wedding. Happy anniversary, sweetie. So, very good. I'd like to start by, as Karen and I got on the plane coming out here, we saw an excerpt from Lisa Gibbons' book about her mom who passed over time, and she wrote some, pretty inspiring stuff. And this is a quote from her. It's about memories. And it says, "The way we get to live forever is through memories stored in the hearts and souls of those whose life touched us." Paul certainly fits that. That's our soul print. It's our comfort, our emotional nourishment at the end of the day, and also the end of a life. How wonderful that they are called up at will and savored randomly. Memories really matter. And I agree with that for sure. So anyway, that was Lisa. So who knew she could do that? Very cool. I can reiterate what I wrote in the blog just to remind everybody. Paul was born in New York City in 1939, August 13th. Our dad was 59 years old when Paul was born. So he was a pretty old guy to start with. And I came along a year later. Our mom was a lot younger. In 1941, we moved to New Jersey from New York City. No more of the high city life. So Dad became a commuter into New York back in those early days when it was really a hassle even to go 10 miles to work in a car. And he commuted into New York and usually did it by bus or train. until his untimely passing in 1948. So Paul and I were young guys when our dad passed, and our mom didn't drive. She did a lot of other things, but she wasn't really out of the house very much. And that meant if Paul and I were going to be doing stuff, it was because we did it ourselves or networked with our friends' parents and even our friends and all that stuff. You know, we never missed a thing. We never missed a thing. Paul was just so incredibly responsible at 9 years old. It's kind of amazing. My mom passed a couple of years later. Never really got over my dad's passing, and Paul and I moved in with the Harrington family, who were our cousins. My mom was Agnes Harrington's sister, and two of the Harrington girls are here today, Beth Donor and Mary Henry from Palm Springs, California. So that was great. There were two other girls and one guy. So Paul and I kind of fit right on the top of a family of five, and here we were for a couple of years pretty much running wild on the streets of Tenafly, New Jersey, taking care of all the things we had to do, and now we're on the top of a family of 7 kids. And all of a sudden it got a little bit more responsible, a little bit more formal. I think my mom actually died on a Thursday. By Monday we were in a Catholic school with ties and jackets. Whoa! That's right. And Uncle Tom was driving the boat, so he was pretty cool. Uncle Tom was Paul's first real fan, and Uncle Tom moved to Palm Springs in 1985 and lived with Mary and her husband. And every time I went to see them, he'd have this collection of cards that Paul had sent, all of which were sent and written with some kind of a crayon that had to be at least the size of your thumb, not your pinky. So if you could read the words in between, it was really because you wanted to read the words in between. But very clear at the end always was, hugs, Paul. His signature. Very good. So, you know, entries on the TK website give us all lots of clues about the person we're actually celebrating here. Paul had lots of folks all over the world that called him a friend, a mentor, and a teacher. And oh yeah, the funniest person in the world. So I had one story about the power of laughing and maybe where Paul might have learned it the first time. In a parish play, I think probably 7th or 8th grade, Paul was maybe 11, 12, or 13. He got the part of the crazy uncle. And the stage was set like a living room. It had all the furniture there, the sofa, chairs, a table. And on the table there was a fishbowl with a few goldfish swimming around in it, very visible to the audience. And the play started and the people did their stuff, the main characters and so on. And you're into the play a little bit and all of a sudden they're changing scenes or something and the stage is clear, no people, and the light dims. And from the left side pops this animated creature, and it's Paul. He is the crazy uncle, escaped from an asylum, and he is being pursued by the guys in the white coats. But we don't see the guys in the white coats yet. So Paul pops across the stage, very Chaplin-esque steps, very calculated, goes over to the fishbowl, reaches deep into the fishbowl, pulls out an orange thing and eats it. And everybody, oh my God, and then he's off the stage. 20 seconds went by and he was there and the place was just coming apart. And just stolen the hearts of the group. Absolutely incredible. It turned out that the fish that were swimming, they had a bunch of carrot shavings and stuff in the bottom, so all those little things were carrots, not fish. But it happened so quickly that you know, it was almost impossible not to at least try this trick again. So somewhere else, when there was another transition, out pops Paul again and goes to the fishbowl, and the guys that are pursuing him finally catch him and they take him off the stage and like this, and he's going back to the asylum and we're not going to see Paul anymore. Well, it goes on and stuff happens and so on, and then another transition happens and all of a sudden Paul enters the stage and he's in a straitjacket and he's all by himself because he's lost his handlers, and he walks to the front of the stage. He's about this high and he just starts to chuckle. And then and all of a sudden the audience just took off. It just laughed harder than he did. I mean, he was crying on the stage laughing so hard. He could not have laughed harder. And I'm not sure anybody remembers who the main characters might have ever been, or what their role was, or was there really a plot here besides bringing out the lunatic to make us laugh? But he understood that, and when he spoke with all of us and spent his time with us, a lot of us probably thought, this guy's so silly sometimes, you know, he's just so silly. It wasn't silly at all. It was part of his introduction and his way of telling you. So, very cool. A very good story. There are lots more, but there's not enough time, and I'm sure they're going to be warming up the hook there pretty soon for me. So, you know, he wasn't perfect by any means, and he couldn't do everything. But the things that he did do made a difference, and that's why we're all here. It was kind of amazing, as everybody will continue to point out, the blog, the comments, I mean, we're all writing something different, touching about the same guy. It's absolutely amazing that could be like it was. But you know, if there was a leak in the plumbing, Paul wasn't going to be the guy that was going to fix that. You know, change a switch or a plug or something like that. Maybe even a light bulb was way past him. But he could always brighten a room just by being there. He could always warm a room just by being there. So he was a pretty special guy. He really didn't like conflict. Conflict was just a place that he never wanted to go. And he certainly didn't like wars. He didn't like anything related to wars. And he would rarely have ever been accused of being arrogant. He just wanted people to get along. He wanted people and animals to get along. He just loved the critters. Sometimes when I went to his house, periodically, you know, we'd get out every 10 years or so, and sometimes I'd look and say, I think Paul is running a used pet shop here. These are the mangiest looking creatures that'll come over and hug you. They all have a personality. He'll give you their bio. He has one for every animal he's ever had. And it was just amazing, but they had a heartbeat, and they were just as special as all of us. We don't know why we lose people like Paul, people that have given us so much, but we do lose them. And we know really, and have been told since we were young, very young, that, you know, life really just isn't fair. Now, some have suggested that Paul might have run out of semicolons. And that would have been grossly unfair, because I know he would have at least worked for trade-offs. I mean, all those extra vowels from that UPI shorthand speak, they had to be worth something. How many semicolons will I get for a vowel? How many semicolons will I get for a consonant? So we had all the vowels left over, and we know at least for the last 8 years he had absolutely no use for W. So what did we learn from Paul? We learned that the better you take care of yourself, the longer you get to take care of everybody else. We also learned about hearts, lots of stuff about hearts. We learned that they work best when there's love in the life, and that too much love isn't even a possibility. Why think that anything like love ever has to be limited? We learned that hearts are stimulated by smiles and laughs and good hard work. And that while they may not last forever, they produce memories that will. He didn't live long enough, but he was the real deal when he was here, and he lived life to the fullest. That's what we're celebrating today. He shared everything he had, except maybe that tam. And the final story on the tam is there really is only one, but dozens of people have it. And he loved us. That's what we learned from Paul also. And Kathy was his girl. I love you, my big brother. One more curtain call. Come on back. Thank you.
Sergeant with Ralph Gidlow on the piano. Many of us who knew Paul in recent years with his exploits with the U.S. ski team had only heard some of the great stories of when Paul was working around the globe with some of the great entertainers of our time. to tell us more, Paul's former wife, Ellen Robbins Cole. Ellen?
I would be Paul's middle wife, or sometimes he would introduce me. This is my second ex-wife. I'm wearing this special World Series Red Sox hat today because after the Sox won the series last fall, he called up and said, what do you want? What do you in DC want? I'm going to go right out and buy it tomorrow. They ought to have it up at the Olympic store by tomorrow. I said, I don't know, send us hats. The hats arrived within a few days. Mine was way too big, it was down to here, but Dave has washed it a million times and managed to make it fit my head, so. We were great Boston sports fans, Paul, DC, and I, and we emailed constantly over the years, as during games, after games, before games. I mean, it was a great love of ours. We met in 1973 when we both worked for Sheraton Hotel's corporate offices in Boston. He was hired there as Assistant Director of Public Relations. We were married in '74, lived in the Boston area for 8 months, moved to Hawaii for 8 months where my son was born, and then we moved to Vermont in 1976 where he stayed forever, and I stayed for 30 years. Paul came with a ready-made family, and I became an instant stepmother to Jay, who was 10 at the time, John, who was 9, and Julie, 5. We even share the same birthday. Our proudest achievement as a married couple was to produce our son, DC, known locally as Dave. DC moved to Southern California 6 years ago, and I followed him 6. I love the weather. No more Vermont winters. I focused on Paul's love of music and 3 specific performers. In the fall of '73, Paul's boss received a call from Liza Minnelli's agent, and they wondered if Sheraton would like to help put together a 26-city tour for 50 people, including a 30-piece orchestra of some of the finest musicians in New York City. Paul's boss came into him and said, I don't know what this is all about, but maybe you could call these people back and figure something out. Well, Paul, he took it and ran with it. His job was to get the Sheraton Hotel in each city or motor in, because we went to some small ones, to do a press conference where Liza would have the Sheraton prominently displayed, and in exchange she'd get a comp suite and all of the entourage would get rooms at a cheaper price, so a group rate. We'd only been dating a short time, and the next thing I knew, we were traveling with Liza and her entourage every weekend from Thursday through Sunday. We'd come home just about have time to do the laundry, and we would go again. He had convinced his boss that he ought to go the first time just because, make sure everything went well. Well, of course, Paul became, as he always is, instantly, everyone relied on him. So when we came back, he said to his boss, oh, I've got to be there for all of the tours. They can't do it without me. And taking my girlfriend with me, too. We became good friends with several of the musicians from the city, and one in particular, Bobby Keller, who was the clarinetist back then, who actually came to Vermont once to visit us and had a flat tire on Route 106, for those of you who live around here, before cell phones. He is a guy that grew up in New Jersey and New York City, and he's got a flat tire in his first ever trip to Vermont. So he and Paul remained friends, and they, emailed and so forth. So I spoke to Bobby the day after Paul passed away, and he said, I'll always remember whenever Liza was singing My Mammy, she would get to the part where she allegedly was deciding whether she was going to get down on one knee the way her mother always did. And he said, we in the orchestra just sat there and we waited, because we knew wherever Paul was, in whatever arena we were in, we would suddenly hear, do it! And Liza would giggle and kind of smile and then go and get down on her knee and finish it off, like she had no idea Paul was going to say that, totally suppressed. We also went on tour with her again the next summer, and we did state fairs with her. At the end of the first tour, the entire entourage gave us a pillow. They took a pillow from one of the Sheraton hotel rooms and stitched a bath mat on the top and put ball fringe around it and wrote on the back, and then they all autographed it on the front. And it's back there on one of those tables. I was the keeper of the pillow till I moved to California, and then I wrapped it up and gave it to him and said, "Your turn." But now I have it back. As a result of referrals from Liza's agent, we got calls at Sheraton from James Taylor's agent and also Cat Stevens' agent. At the time, this is in early 70s, we didn't even really know who Cat Stevens was. Sorry, John. And Paul said, well, I know James Taylor a little because when I was with UPI and he got released from rehab up in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, I had to drive up there and interview this new singer that was getting released. So he had actually met him before. Well, we saw James once, and that was it. We became lifelong James Taylor fans. We also loved Harry Chapin, the great singer-songwriter who died tragically at age 38 in a car crash back in 1981. He lived on Long Island, but he owned a ski house at Pico in Vermont. So every Christmas while he was up here skiing, he would, with his two brothers, Tom and Steve, he would come to the Rutland High School and he would perform for local people to raise money for the World Hunger Organization. And you would walk into the gym, take your shoes off by the door because you couldn't do anything with the basketball floor, and slide across the floor in your socks, sit down cross-legged. Harry and his two brothers would sit in folding chairs like that and just sing for a couple hours. And it was just so down to earth and so nice. And at the end, everybody would get up and they would hold hands and sing the song, All My Life's a Circle, or as Harry called it, the Chapin family anthem. And we always loved doing that. I asked DC recently, I said, do you remember going to see Harry in Rutland? And he was about 4 or 5 at the time. He goes, yup, sat on the floor on the left side. Apparently he has his father's memory. Paul was thrilled when Harry agreed to be interviewed at his house in Pico one winter for the story in the Rutland Herald. And his sudden death in '81 left us all quite shocked and saddened. And I just was talking to his brother John last night and found out that John was a huge Harry Chapin fan. And when I called Paul to tell him that he had died, he called John immediately. And John said whenever Harry would come to the Greek Theater in LA and John would go with a group of people and he'd go backstage and he'd knock on the door and he'd say, I'd like to see Harry. Just tell him Rutland Ski Club. And Harry would come right out. And John would say, John Robbins, Paul Robbins, yeah, how's Paul doing? And as John said, I didn't get to meet any of the other famous ones. Even though we were only married a short time, Paul and I remained best friends and committed co-parents for the 35 years that I was honored to have him in my life. I attended his wedding to Kathy 18 years ago at the Reading Town Hall and sat in the front row with his children, Jay, John, and Julie. DC was the best man. Leah was the flower dog. Before the ceremony, Paul came running out and thrust an old Instamatic camera and a package of revolving flash cubes at me and said, here, take some pictures. And then ran back off. I gave them to John. John took the pictures. So, after we moved to California, Paul and I emailed pretty much on a daily basis. And yes, I was on the joke list. Sometimes I'd come home from work at night and there would be 20 of them. And I'd look for one that might have a real message in it because I don't want to delete that one. And then I'd just go delete, 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 delete. And some days I'd read them all, depending on what day it was. But the last email that he sent to a group of us was a YouTube video. I can't imagine Paul discovering YouTube when you could barely get him to learn to use a computer. But He loved you too. And it was about a cat, a dog, and a rat. And they were the property of a homeless man in Santa Barbara, California. And the cat wrote on the back of the dog, and the rat wrote on the back of the cat. And Paul's message in the email, which is back there in one of the albums, was, if they can get along, why can't the rest of us? So I responded immediately back to him, said, well, that's really cool. And he responded back to me, and that was the end of the emails. 3 hours later, DC called me to let me know. His former sister-in-law, Mickey Robbins, made a trip to Santa Barbara not long after Paul died, and she found the homeless man with the 3 animals and told him the story about Paul and took a picture of the animals. And the man was quite touched that someone had spread his story all over the country, this man from Vermont. It is hard to imagine a life without Paul in it, but I know he's in heaven right now with his son JR, Red Auerbach, and maybe even little Timmy Russell, since Buffalo doesn't have an NBA team, and Mike Barnacle of Boston was Russell's best friend. And they're celebrating the Celtics' return to glory. I also know that if Paul had still been with us on June 17th, he would have rushed out the next day to buy DC and me our Celtics championship shirts. I have coined a special word to describe Paul. He was the goodest man I have ever known, and I shall always cherish the 35 years I was fortunate enough to have him as my friend. Thank you.
Back in 1978, when my dear friend Peter Graves and I met the 3rd member of our 3 amigos. I'm very pleased to invite now Paul's dear friend Peter Graves to say a few words. Peter?
Good afternoon. It is Paul and love that have brought us together here today. As I stand before you and look out at friends that have come from all across the nation, I am reminded of what an impact Paul Robbins had on all our lives. He was a father and husband, an uncle and a friend, a mentor, a teacher, a therapist to many, including me, and a coach, a skilled writer, a walking lexicon, as Warner Kirchhoffer used to say, who started the first World Cup for cross-country skiing. Your friend Paul is a walking lexicon, he would say. A talented broadcaster, a teller of tales, a man whom enjoyed friendships from all walks of life. How do we love you, Paul? Let us count the ways. So Paul, thank you for coming out to the Telemark Lodge in 1978 and working on that first World Cup of cross-country skiing. We were young and we were just starting out, and he was the wise man of the world, and he taught us so much. And Paulie, you were so smart not to take Tony Wise's PR director job when he offered it to you after knowing you for 10 minutes, and most importantly, because our friend Tom Kelly needed a job. Thanks, Paul. A little bit of history here in the ski world. Paul flew all night, having received a bunch of money from Tony Wise, the late Tony Wise, member of the U.S. Ski Hall of Fame, to bring back some film for ABC Sports in New York. And Paul, that night, Tony gave you a bundle of money for your expenses, and today he is looking for receipts, bub. Where are they? Do you know? In the office. Thanks, Paul, for wearing that tam. It was your signature. And we could always find you in the finishing corral or the mixed zone at the Olympics or World Cup. It was a sign that all was well. You could see it up here. Robbins had it under control, and we were very lucky to have that great feeling. On his way to Lillehammer, and you know the trademark signature of the tam, Paul got to the Manchester airport and realized that he didn't have his tam with him. This was a very, very big problem. So he called the tam place over in Woodstock, is it, or around there, and Queechee, I guess, and had somebody pay to drive this tam over to the airport, which I'm sure must have cost way more than the tam did. And I always wondered why didn't he have a backup or two, but I guess we're finding out in some cases he did today. Thanks, Paul, for sharing your love of food with us. Oh, and especially me. Even when we would eat at the elegant Hotel Jerome in Aspen, Paul would say, "I'll have mac and cheese. It's killer there, the best I've ever had." You taught us the simple pleasures of a cool glass of milk, but I'll still take my cold beer unless Gary Black is buying the wine. Thanks, Paul, for telling us on your travel trip to China that the Chinese didn't know how to make rice. He said, "Haven't they heard of Uncle Ben's?" This is way better. On that particular trip, you were the only journalist, and everybody was envious about you, why you were given meat to eat every night. And you told the organizers that you wouldn't come if you couldn't have a steak served to you every night. As Paul would say, "I don't do fish." Speaking of food, which Paul and I considered maybe the basis for our relationship. Kidding. Thanks, Paul, for sharing your love of haute cuisine with us. Or more simply put, burgers and milkshakes and cheese fries and bacon, all cooked black as night and indiscernible as a foodstuff. If they ain't black, they're going back, was his mantra. And you know, all around the country, from Steamboat Springs to Sugarloaf, from Mountaineer in Park City to Lou's here in town, they knew that. They knew what they had to do when Paul came in. I don't know about some of you, but I'm sure you were a recipient of a lot of things that I got. So I say thanks, Paul, for supplying me and many others with a lifetime supply of sugar packets, of matchbooks, of salt and canned jams. Oh man, from 100 different hotels around the globe. He always chuckled about that. He said, "I'll never have to buy another bar of soap." And he said his larder was stocked with soap from every hotel he ever stayed in. Thanks for sharing the Olympics with us, Paul. Because we didn't always get to go. Posters and stickers, autographs from the likes of Bjorn Dahlia were commonplace to bring home as gifts. He never forgot us, and they were undyingly kind. And then there was the press room and the interaction in it. A cookie, a bag of chips, pretzels, peanuts, or candy was never safe from Paul's scrutiny, and many of you know this well. They either came back with him to his room, where they were offered to us, or they went back all the way to Vermont to be stored in his, well, amazingly jam-packed office, filling up drawers. When we went through Paul's office, we found so many things, bags and bags of potato chips and candy and M&Ms, and so some of the great food that we have behind you that you're invited to take to. You know, he always had a free Coke for me, because going back to Lake Placid and Sarajevo, he would always grab a handful of Cokes and bring them back, and they were in his office. And he always said, "That's one soda I don't need to buy." I don't know how many of you know this, but Paul's first Olympiad was in Lake Placid. And he was a press chief for luge. I have to tell you, Paul didn't know anything about luge. He said, "Isn't that the sport that you lie on your back and go down in a sled, that the Russians always win?" But you know, he put the pedal to the metal, and he learned, and he was a darn good press chief, and that carried through. So thank you, Paulie, for giving us a primer on recycling. He was way ahead of his time. He'd bring a lot of magazines from Vermont and leave them in Colorado. The time we stayed in Steamboat, man, I'll never forget it. He brought gym bags with Men's Journal and Time and Outside Magazine and all that stuff. And I thought he was going to read them all over the weekend. Well, he didn't. He left them there for the maids. And they came out running after the car that was taking us back to DIA, saying, "Mr. Robbins, you left your magazines here." "Oh, no, they're for you," he said. Oh, boy. Well, you've heard somebody say today his love of animals, and I think that was so true. And I just, when we first started having dogs, I wondered why dogs are so attracted to Paul Robbins. And then finally, I understood. He never went anywhere without a dog biscuit in his pocket, and the dog population just followed along. Thanks, Paul, for being a lover of sports, especially your love of skiing. You embraced skiing, you loved and honored its people and its stories, and for so very long. Thanks, Paul, for making us laugh, your jokes on email, and for taking up much of the available bandwidth on the internet, that at one time they had a visit to the house from somebody who said, "Are you a professional spammer?" But Paul always said, for all of us that got those emails, every day we should have one good yuck. Getting them now. Accomplished, you stayed incredibly great. BC jackets away to the local fire day. I loved you for that. And thanks for your posts you sent from around the world. Feel closer to you. Another thing, fashion. Thanks, Paul, for your lesson in fashion. You were the guy who insisted upon wearing shorts until the 1st of December, and for no particular reason. It just made sense to him. Just like the flannel sheets that had to adorn his bed come the 1st of October every year. Thanks, Paul, for all the late nights and early mornings you devoted to tracking down results and coaches and athletes across the world's time zones for a quote, a result, always with a generosity of spirit and kindness that made you the consummate journalist. The ingenuity of your craft was as limitless as the tenderness of your heart. With your work, you were absolutely inexhaustible. And to you, there was no seventh day. We also learned through Paul about his larger circle of friends from all walks of life. His love of coaching, soccer and baseball, and officiating and gardening, and all that he did with so many of you. He did cast a wide net around this planet and every place he lived. He gave us lesson after lesson of his extraordinary appreciation for his friends. Paul loved the art of conversation, always taking the time to expand his world and ours. Funny, witty, absolutely. I don't know how many times we attended a Paul Robbins 5th annual 60th birthday party. Thanks, Paul, for sharing your family with us, both past and present. You always talked about them, you bragged about them, and you let us see you from a fully human perspective. We take great comfort, all of us here today, from the fact that we knew you were loved and appreciated so deeply. On that late afternoon, kind of a steely gray afternoon, when Doug Haney and TK were getting those calls out, and we began to hear this awful, terrible news that you had left us. Suddenly and totally unexpectedly, you were gone. This just can't be, I said, and we all said that day. It's impossible, simply illogical in the destiny of things that the world had to rearrange itself so quickly.
Sharing your talents with us here today. I apologize we're running a little bit long, but you know, Paul was never much on deadlines and time either, so we have a special reading and something that is on a topic that was very special to Paul, and it's my pleasure to introduce a great friend of Paul from Vermont, someone who coached with him for many years. Please welcome Carl Wyman. Carl, can you join us?
Back in the 1990s, when Anna was in middle school, my friend Paul Robbins gave me the email name Coach Carl, and I thought that was kind of nice of him, but it was Paul who was the coach. Paul, probably in two towns, Reading and Wethersfield, has spent a number of years coaching, reffing, umpiring, coaching third, batting coach, basketball ref, still seeing him running up and down the field, officiating a soccer game. I can still picture Paul coming across the field to a soccer game wearing his shorts and his winter coat, sometimes holding Kathy's hand, that big smile, that was suspicious. Paul in basketball gave us the two-shot foul for hugging. One of our players was guarding a little too close one day. Paul said he thought they were dating, but anyway, we had the two-shot foul for hugging. Kathy says if it could be attached to your feet, or if it was spherical and it had rules and regs and stats, then it was Paul's world. I recently learned something that I couldn't believe. I'm not sure how many people here know, but Paul played college baseball and once tried out for pitcher at Yankee Stadium. Gasp. Wow. So why a Red Sox fan? I'm sure there's a story there. Probably that'll take another time. And then there was the story of the Mudville Nine. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 4-2, but with 1 inning more to play. And when Cooney died at first and Barrows did the same, a sickly silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A staggering few got up to go in deep despair. The rest clung to that hope which springs eternal in human breast. They thought if only Casey could get a whack at that, we'd put even money now with Casey at bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, and also did Jimmy Blake, and the former was a Lulu and the latter was a cake. So upon that stricken multitude grim melancholy sat, for there seemed little chance of Casey getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted and men saw what had occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second and Flynn a hugging third. Then from 5,000 throats and more there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled through the valley, it rattled through the dell, it knocked upon the mountain and recoiled upon the flat, for mighty Casey was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was a pride in Casey's bearing and a smile on Casey's face. And when responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat. No stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at bat. 10,000 eyes were upon him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded when he wiped them on his shirt. Then while Withering Pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance gleamed in Casey's eye, a sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman the ball unheeded sped. That ain't my style, said Casey. Strike one, the umpire said. From the benches, black with people, there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of a storm waves on the stern and a distant shore. Kill him! Kill the umpire! Shouted someone in the stand, and it's likely they'd have killed him had Casey not raised his hand. But with the smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult, the blade, game go on, and bade game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the sphere flew, but Casey ignored it, and the umpire said, strike two. Fraud, called the maiden thousands, and echoed, answered fraud. But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold, and they saw his muscles strain, and they knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lip, and the teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate, and now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go, and now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in his favorite land the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light, and somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout, but there's no joy in Mudville, mighty Casey struck out. I think of all of the times Paul was at a game, always participating. You know, being a spectator was hard for him, and how he loved it. He brought color to every game that he come to, and I still laugh at the time that in the batter stuck her tongue out at the pitcher in the middle of a ball game. Oh, how he loved that. That was sport at his best. And I really miss Paul and my Norfolk.
As friends of Paul, we always heard about his children. He was so proud of all of his children. He talked about them a lot. Stole. He borrowed souvenirs from the press rooms to send back to them. And for those of us in skiing, it's particularly exciting now to see son David, or DC, very involved in the sport and living the same passion that he learned from his father. very honored, DC, to have you say a few words about your father today.
All right, let's see how this goes. First off, thanks to TK and Gravy for putting this all together. Good. And I had something written. It was really nice, really long, but since Gravy stole my copy, I guess I'll just wing it. As TK was saying, this year I've been working on with the production company covering all the ski team events, and actually was at 3 times as many events as my dad was. So the question I normally got was, oh hey, great, you're Paulson, where is he? He's back in Vermont, actually, so I'll have to do. So the first event we do is Beaver Creek. It was the Men's World Cup, and 8 in the morning, the downhill's canceled. I'm, on site, think that I'll call Dad. I'll let him know that, it's too windy. We can't have the event. It's going to be pushed off a day. So call up, get a hold of him, and go, hey Dad, just want to let you know the event's been canceled. He goes, yeah, I know. I was just talking to Julianne. I just sent out the press release. Now, I don't know if anybody's been scooped by their own dad at their own event, much less back in Vermont. But he always knew what was going on everywhere. And later that day, as we've made a note that Harry Chapin was one of his favorite artists, driving around, and of course, Cats in the Cradle comes on the radio. I was like, imagine that. Well, I don't think that I'll ever grow up to be just like him, but if I can grow up to be about half the man he is, then I'll consider that a success. So, Dad, thanks.
I would like to, we'll have a little time for some of you who may wish to also share some thoughts, and afterwards we'll also have an opportunity to socialize. But I'd like to introduce now one of Paul's closest friends from here in Vermont. He wasn't one of us who traveled the world with Paul, but he was closer to Paul than many or all of us. And I know he wants to say a few words today, so I would like to introduce Paul's very good friend, John Philpin.
Keep listening to people refer to him as Paul. My friend Pablo. The reason he got that name is that when he was PR for Paul Robbins' U.S. ski team, he followed up his email accounts, which was part of the course. He was a neo-Luddite. And I would get anywhere from 1 to 3 calls a day from Pablo. They'd always began the same way. Okay, now I press this button and that happens. What do I do next? Paul bought the house next door to us in 1976. And it was a young family moving next door. The guy looked like he was pretty cool, thin, a lot of black hair, dark hair, goatee I think he had at the time, and looked like an interesting guy. But it took a while to get to know him because he was never there. And you have a new neighbor like this, and so you ask, where is he? Well, one occasion he was in China. You mean Taiwan? No, communist China. Another time I asked him where he'd been, and he said he was skiing on a glacier in South America. I don't know anything about skiing, but skiing on a glacier in South America doesn't sound like the sort of thing that everybody does. He arrived with Hawaii license plates on his car. And this was Vermont. Didn't make sense. What do you do for a living? Well, I'm a travel writer, so I have to travel all the time. Didn't fool me. I knew he was CIA. And it went on like that for many years. I confronted him, of course. And he denied that he was CIA. Actually, he would neither confirm nor deny. That was what it was. Over the years, one of our regular things that we would do is get together and do the shopping in Claremont. And we'd stop, for years it was a whatever diner, Paul couldn't pass a diner, whatever diner happened to be around, we would stop to eat there. And then later on it became the Lucky Walk, which I always called the Happy Walk, and he was always happy to correct me by calling it the Lucky Walk. Chinese buffet lunch for $5. Good food too. And then we'd go and do the shopping, and invariably he'd finish before I did. And he'd be ahead of me in the line. And for several times to the grocery, I noticed that by the time I got to the checkout checkout person would be eyeing me sort of suspiciously. I didn't know why. I had no idea why. This went on for a while. I think once I even asked, did you say something to her? And then finally one time I overheard him prepping the checkout person by explaining that he was a probation officer. My probation officer. But that she really didn't have to worry too much because I'd been on good behavior lately. This is a celebration of Paul's life. Being with Paul was always a celebration. There was always humor, good feelings, laughter. One last quick thing. When he would introduce me to friends of his that I didn't know, he would say, "This is my friend John. He writes sick stuff." How could I argue? So I got back at him, and if you look at, not my nonfiction work, but any of my novels, you will find a character named Paul, or Paul Robbins, or Robbins. And in the book I just finished, there is a character whose name is Father Paul. And his message to the world is one of personal discipline. Which Paul forever preached to me. Well, this has been a wonderful experience, seeing all of you and hearing the wonderful stories about Paul. And I miss him, we all miss him, and I feel very fortunate to have had him as a friend for so long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I have a comment from a dear friend of Paul's, Deborah Snyder, who worked together with Paul and myself for many years, and she said, Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, the truly successful people start their lives with the end in mind. How do we wish to be remembered? What do we want people to think of us after we pass on? By these standards, Paul was immeasurably successful. His life was a work of art, brilliantly quirky, endearingly unique, and 100% Paul, as we've heard today. We do have a few moments. I know we've run a little long, but do we have anyone who would like to add some comments or stories here before we break up?
My name is Hank Smith, and I'm a friend of Paul's and also a rival coach.
Could you use the mic?
Yeah, sure.
And I was recently cleaning out my office in preparation of moving into another office, and I came across a letter that Paul had written back in 1988, which I would like to give to David. Now, Paul, in addition to being a coach, was also the commissioner of the league, and he took that job very seriously. As a matter of fact, he sort of ran the league like Animal Farm, you know, where everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. And Paul was a little more equal than others, and when he sent you letters, he always put his suggestions in there. Not that you had to follow them, but he just wanted to let you know what he was thinking about. And this was a letter that he wrote to all of the coaches, and this was his recommendations for the All-Star team. And I was coaching the Bridgewater Bee Stompers, that was our name. And the Bee Stompers were always beating Reading. Yay. And Woodstock was in the league, and I think Pomfret was also. And the people here that were recommended to be on the All-Star team include David, and my son who's in the back, Dan, and there's Ramsey Worrell in the back. So a lot of the old players are here, and these are people that many of us know. And Dave, if you'd come up here, I'd like to give this to you. And it's got all my notes on it and all my scribblings, and I found it really interesting to see it once again after so many years. So David, will you thank you.
And he did vote for Matt Richardson for MVP. And even put Dan in third.
Thank you. Do we have any others who would like to share a story? Yes.
All right, those with delicate ears, cover them right now. I'm riding back with Dave and Paul from I forget what, and I start complaining to Dave makes that I have to go to the bathroom. And we're not really that far away, and Paul's getting kind of sick of it. And finally he goes, Brent, what you need to do is you need to pinch the end of your pecker. And you're just going to start moving away. You're just going to start moving further and further away from your hand. And by the time you're about 30 feet away from your hand, we'll be home. Perhaps this held part of the secret to his success with women as well. I don't know. But anyways, Dave and I always considered him to be absolutely hilarious. Had some great times. Another quick story. I remember him telling us about, he was at some big ski and sports event, and he went over to get a can of Coke, and he stands up and he sees Scott Hamilton standing there, the famous skater. And he looks at him and he goes, "Oh my God, you're Peggy Fleming." I'm Scott Hamilton, and now he goes and shakes his hand. Oh God. Anyways, we all loved the man. He loved all of us. Got a something I wrote here. It's called Shorts in November. The left-handed pitch with just a little spin, a deep belly laugh, then the ear-to-ear grin. A postcard addressed to Team Marinello. Austria's great, just thought I'd say hello. You wore shorts in November, this world couldn't make you cold. I will always remember a man who couldn't be sold. Dave and I out back for a touch football game. Patterns so complex, they don't even have a name. He promised to Kathy on the day they would marry, I will love you even if your legs become hairy. You wore shorts in November, this world couldn't make you cold. I will always remember a man who couldn't be sold.
Greg, thank you so much. Do we have any others who would like to make some comments? Yes. Coach Bob Beatty of the U.S. ski team.
Boy, I tell you, I don't think any of my 4 wives would ever get up and talk nicely about me. Paul, you've done a lot of good things. Paul was sure a great guy, and he did everything well. And we get every night. And I am a huge Red Sox fan, as Paul is. And I saw that. And we watch the games every night, but for my wife's benefit, I turn the sound way down. It goes on from 5, the home games, from 5 till closing. And so it goes through dinner. But Paul, in your memory, I am going to turn the sound all the way up. That's the least I can do, Paul, and I'm going to tell my wife why I'm doing it. It's great to be here and to celebrate this memorial with Paul. Thank you very much.
We won't tell Marcy yet. Do we have any other comments? Yes, Doug?
I first met Paul in 2001, December it was, before the 2002 Olympic Games. I had just finished an internship with the USOC and got a call from Tom Kelly to be a press officer for Nordic for that year. And flew to Steamboat, went to the small airport there, and was picked up by a little fat man with a funny little mustache who had the most incredible laugh of anyone I'd ever met. And I walked off the plane and he said, "Hey, young legs, good to meet you." I don't think I ever spoke to Paul before that, but he nicknamed me already. Showed me all around Steamboat, introduced me to Peter Graves, and pretty soon it was best friends. Years after that, Paul and I were the news bureau for the USSA for a couple of, probably 3 years. And we'd get up in the morning, 3:30, 4 in the morning to watch races online and calling each other back and forth on the phone. That's when I became Batman, and we became Batman and Robbins. But we all know who was the real leader of that troop, and it wasn't Batman. In cleaning out Paul's office, a month ago or so, there was amazing how many things that you would find that had relations to all of you in this room. Most of you I don't know. Paul, as you know, on top of his emails, he would send you things. He'd send you newspaper articles, clippings, pictures, anything he could find. There was a lot of pre-addressed envelopes ready to go. Julianne, I found a few for you that Paul would just drop. So I would get them all the time in a little diner in Rutland. Or no, where was it? Hancock. It was Hancock. I was reading the Rutland Herald, and I found a letter to the editor that I immediately said, this is something I would clip and send to Paul. This is from yesterday's Rutland Herald. Theft contains a sad secret. To the person who stole a terracotta gnome from the front steps in Pittsburgh, we hope you're enjoying the gnome as much as we did. We also hope you were again. My mother's ashes were mixed in with the clay. For a man whose ashes are displayed in a dumpets box per his request, he would think this is pretty funny.
Kathy?
I know most of your names. In fact, one of the last conversations Paul and I had the morning he died was, he looked at me and he said, you know, you hear all these names. Do you have any idea who I'm talking about? And I said, no. And he just laughed and thought that was fun. He thought that was okay. So when I look at how many of you are here, I am just astounded. I knew how important Paul was. I knew how many people he knew. But as we were cleaning out his office, as we were going through his things, the impact of, he really was in China, because I found the guidebooks from Shanghai, and he really was in Egypt, because I found the contact sheets from the people on the camels in front of the pyramids. He was in all of those places. There were all of the euros and the Norwegian kroner and the Japanese yen stuffed in all the magazines. Every time I picked up a magazine, there'd be another bill of some kind. They're all in a bag, you know, waiting to be cashed in someday. But my daughter's boyfriend says, not yet, they're all strong, so we'll hold on to them for a while. Paul spent most of his life rearranging 26 letters of the alphabet in countless, unnumbered ways. If he wasn't get paid, he'd leave some out, as you all know. But he loved to write, and he loved realizing in the last few months of his life that he and I were now both writing for a living, and he thought that was just the best. That was the way he wanted his life to end. I miss him. I wish he weren't gone, but so what? That's the way it goes. I will probably not get a chance to say hello to all of you, but I am very grateful that you're all here. I hope you at least get to talk to Paul's children. His son-in-law, Chris, is here. His son, Jay, is here. Grandson, Joe, is here. Is that Jillian?
Yep.
Yeah. Granddaughter, Jillian, is here from Texas.
Great-granddaughter.
And great-granddaughter, Olivia, is here. Son David and stepdaughter, and grandson Chase. Stepdaughter Anna is here, and I hope you at least say hello to us, even though I really won't know who you are. As Paul used to say, they could hold the Olympics in my lap and I still wouldn't watch, and he was pretty much right. So. But I honor all of you for how much pleasure you gave him. How this little kid from Jersey wound up being such a sports nut, or a skiing nut, I don't know. But he loved all of you, and he loved the fact that I had a real job, so he never had to get one. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all for coming here today. We have some light refreshments and sodas from the Downs Country Inn here, and others who may have brought some things. We have some Dunkin' Donuts and some of Paul's favorite types and styles. So we invite you to join us in the back, and if you could oblige us, and please allow the family to go back first. Thank you very much for joining us here today and celebrating Paul Robbins' life.